The alien instructors gathered in the observation room, their expressions a mix of intrigue and confidence as they reviewed the profile of the human standing in the training yard below. "He's from Earth," one of them said, his tone almost dismissive. "The infamous Deathworld, but we've handled species from harsh environments before." Another trainer, a reptilian creature with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Let's not underestimate him too quickly. Deathworld or not, they all break eventually." Down below, the human stood calmly, surveying the area. His breathing steady, his movements measured. The challenges were about to begin, and yet, he looked relaxed, too relaxed, thought the alien trainers. The training program commenced with a jungle environment, dense with flora that responded aggressively to touch. The trees reached out with sharp branches and the ground was uneven, covered in hazardous foliage. Previous species had struggled here, barely making it through. But the human? He moved through the environment with an ease that startled the trainers. His steps were careful, calculated, and the hostile plants that lashed out were effortlessly dodged or hacked away with a survival knife. When the terrain became steep, he adjusted his pace, shifting his balance with practiced precision. "Look at that." "No hesitation," one of the aliens muttered. "He should be slowing down by now." "He's just warming up," another replied, the nervousness in their voice barely masked. As the simulation transitioned into a harsher desert environment, blistering heat and sandstorms obscuring vision, the human kept advancing. His breathing remained steady, unaffected by the scorching temperatures that typically drained the stamina of others. The trainers exchanged uneasy glances. Shouldn't he be faltering by now? He's not even breaking a sweat. Finally, the alien instructors introduced combat drones into the simulation, fast, agile machines designed to outmaneuver most species. They zipped through the sky, firing precision blasts at the human. Most recruits were overwhelmed by their speed alone. The human, however, displayed reflexes that stunned the observers. Without any sign of panic, he dodged, ducked, and weaved through the blasts, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. The drones fell one by one, disarmed and dismantled, the human having used minimal energy to dispatch them. How is he doing this?" a voice crackled over the comms. "He's adapting," the reptilian trainer said, the beginnings of disbelief creeping into his tone. "Faster than we expected." As the final wave of the initial challenge ended, the human walked calmly to the end of the course, his expression barely changed. The alien trainers, who had been so confident earlier, were now silent, watching him with a mixture of awe and concern. They hadn't seen anything like this before. The human looked up at them through the observation window. His voice, when he spoke, was casual, almost bored. "Is that it?" The room went silent. The trainers exchanged glances, each silently processing the same thought: what they had thrown at him, challenges that had broken the finest soldiers from dozens of species, was mere child's play to him. Panic began to set in. The human's performance had left the alien trainers uneasy, but they weren't about to admit defeat. Quiet discussions in the control room turned into frantic adjustments. They ramped up the difficulty of the next set of challenges, determined to push the human to his limit. The environment changed rapidly. He was thrust into a gravity-altered zone, where the pull shifted every few minutes, dragging in different directions. The terrain was jagged, filled with sharp cliffs and unstable ground. The shifting gravity alone was enough to disorient most recruits, leaving them vulnerable to natural hazards. But the human adapted instantly. His steps shifted with the gravity, body leaning effortlessly into the change, using it to his advantage. As the ground pulled and twisted unpredictably, he adjusted his footing and kept moving forward, unfazed. His eyes scanned the landscape ahead, calculating the next shift before it even happened. What is he doing? He's predicting the gravity changes, an alien trainer whispered, unable to hide their growing concern. I don't understand, another muttered. No one reacts this fast. Soon after, the next wave came. The drones returned, but these were faster, their movements erratic and unpredictable, their weaponry upgraded. They swarmed in groups, attacking from multiple angles. the trainers had designed this level to overwhelm even the most capable warriors. The human didn't miss a beat. He rolled, ducked, and fired back with startling accuracy, picking off drones in the split seconds between their attacks. His reactions were faster than the simulations, his aim precise even in the midst of chaos. Each move was deliberate, nothing wasted. The trainers were in disbelief. This was beyond survival now, he was thriving in a scenario meant to break him. His efficiency was unnerving, like he was solving a puzzle rather than fighting for his life. He should be struggling by now, one of the trainers growled, frustration rising. How can he possibly? I don't think we've gone far enough, another interrupted, voice shaking slightly. We need to increase the danger. He's still holding back. They exchanged uncertain glances but agreed. The next challenge was activated. Without warning, the human found himself dropped into a hyperthermal zone, temperatures rising to extremes that no species had ever endured for long. The air itself shimmered from the heat, and the ground bubbled with molten rock. Automated turrets emerged from the landscape, targeting him with high-intensity plasma shots. The human moved swiftly, using the environment to shield himself from the plasma, even in the midst of unbearable heat. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his expression remained composed. Every motion seemed calculated, as if he had trained in conditions like this before. He used the molten rock as a weapon, manipulating the environment in ways the trainers hadn't anticipated. The aliens in the control room were silent, watching with wide eyes. There was a clear sense of disbelief now. He's not just surviving, one of them finally said, voice hoarse. He's beating the simulation. The human completed the challenge, standing amidst the ruined drones and overheated turrets, barely looking fazed. He glanced upward again, meeting their gaze through the observation window. What's next? He asked, his voice as calm as ever. The panic in the control room was no longer subtle. The alien trainers were out of ideas. Everything they had thrown at the human had been dismantled, analyzed, and overcome. The simulation systems, once designed to test the best warriors in the galaxy, now seemed inadequate. They needed something more, something no one had ever completed. In a rushed meeting, the trainers debated. The human had asked for harder challenges, and they were running out of ways to deliver. One of the more nervous trainers suggested their final resort, the unbeatable challenge, an intense simulation modeled after the most dangerous war zones in the galaxy. No recruit had ever come close to surviving it. The others hesitated, but desperation had settled in. If the human completed this, it would mean their entire program had failed. Still, they activated it. The human was dropped into a simulated environment more chaotic than anything before. Alien predators, each biologically engineered to be the deadliest of their kind, stalked the terrain. The atmosphere shifted between extreme cold and unbearable heat, with frequent electrical storms flashing in the distance. Automated defenses scattered the landscape, firing plasma in unpredictable patterns. From the control room, the trainers watched with bated breath, convinced this would be the moment when the human would struggle, perhaps even fail. But as the simulation unfolded, their hopes quickly faded. The human moved through the environment, showing no signs of panic or fear. His eyes were sharp, assessing the predators and using the landscape to trap them, forcing even the most intelligent creatures into mistakes. He took calculated risks, using the erratic plasma fire to his advantage, luring the predators into the automated defenses. His ability to adapt and control the battlefield was uncanny, far beyond what the trainers had anticipated. He's making this look easy, one trainer said, his voice trembling. It's not possible, another whispered, shaking their head in disbelief. The human engaged the most dangerous predator, a creature designed to mimic the deadliest beasts from multiple planets. It was fast, unpredictable, and capable of withstanding immense damage. For a moment, the trainers felt a glimmer of hope. But the human's response was methodical. He didn't fight the creature head-on. Instead, he studied its movements, found its weaknesses, and used the environment to trap it. The final blow was swift and efficient. The predator collapsed, and the simulation's final phase was initiated. Suddenly, the entire area began to collapse into chaos. Lava bursts erupted from the ground, the atmosphere turned toxic, and visibility dropped to near zero. The trainers leaned forward, certain that this would be the end. The human couldn't possibly survive in these conditions. Yet, as the dust settled, the human emerged, covered in grime but unharmed. He had navigated the collapsing terrain with an almost unnatural level of precision. The war zone that had crushed countless recruits now lay in ruins behind him. In the control room, silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The human glanced up again, his expression unreadable. His words cut through the stunned quiet like a knife. "That was interesting." One of the trainers sank into their seat, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Another trainer, who had been the most confident earlier, now looked pale, his hands trembling. "He beat it," someone whispered, the words barely audible. The realization hit them all at once. Their unbeatable challenge had been beaten by a human. Panic settled in, deeper than before. The alien trainers were no longer calm. What had started as a routine assessment had spiraled into something unprecedented. Whispers of disbelief spread through the control room as they scrambled to figure out their next move. The human had shattered every expectation, leaving them with nothing left but their most extreme, classified tests, scenarios deemed impossible for any species to complete. One of the senior trainers, normally composed, stared at the human's profile on the screen. "We can't keep up. He's outpacing the simulations." The others looked at each other, uncertain. They knew what was coming next but didn't want to admit it. If the human continued to succeed, it would expose their entire system as flawed. With no options left, they authorized the ultimate challenge, a combat scenario meant for elite warriors in the galaxy's deadliest war zones. The stakes were higher than ever, failure could result in fatal injury, and success was simply unheard of. As the simulation began, the human was dropped into a hostile environment with no warning. It was a battlefield engulfed in chaos. War machines, each larger than anything he had faced before, roamed the horizon. The air was thick with the sound of artillery fire and the smell of burning metal. Alien mercenaries, each with years of combat experience, swarmed the area. There was no respite, no safe zone, just pure, unfiltered warfare. The trainers watched with grim faces. They knew this was the tipping point. If the human faltered here, they would at least have some control over the narrative. But if he succeeded? To their growing horror, the human didn't just survive. He thrived. He moved with deadly precision, using the terrain to his advantage once more, disarming enemies with tactical expertise that rivaled their best soldiers. Every step he took was deliberate, avoiding traps, neutralizing threats, and outmaneuvering foes that had torn through previous recruits in minutes. The war machines, each designed to be nearly invincible, were dismantled with ingenuity. He found their weak points, exploited them, and left a trail of destruction in his wake. "This isn't right. No one should be able to do this," one of the younger trainers muttered. "He's more than just trained," another added, shaking their head. "It's like he's built for this." The human showed no signs of fatigue, even as the battle raged on. He fought with an intensity that left the alien trainers speechless. He didn't just fight to survive, he fought to dominate the battlefield, with a strategy and force that they couldn't comprehend. As the simulation reached its climax, a massive alien warship descended, blocking out the sky. It was their final card, the ultimate threat, capable of wiping out entire armies. The trainers watched, knowing that no recruit had ever gotten this far, let alone faced the warship. They were certain this would be the end. But the human didn't hesitate. He observed the ship's descent, calculated his next move, and then, to the trainer's disbelief, he went on the offensive. Using weapons scavenged from fallen enemies, he launched an attack that pierced through the ship's defenses. Alarms blared as the ship struggled to keep up with his relentless assault. In mere moments, the warship collapsed in a fiery explosion, leaving the battlefield in a stunned silence. The human stood there, calm amidst the destruction. The trainers were frozen, unable to process what had just occurred. Impossible, one of them whispered. The human looked up at them once again, his expression unreadable but his message clear. Now what? The alien trainers had reached their breaking point. What was once a controlled, highly monitored test had devolved into chaos. The human had obliterated every challenge they had put before him, and now there was nothing left. In the control room, the atmosphere was tense. Panic had set in. Their entire training program, once lauded as the ultimate test of galactic warriors, now felt like a farce. If word got out that a human, a Deathworlder, had beaten every scenario, their reputation would be ruined. Worse, it would challenge the established order of the galaxy. Humans were not supposed to be this powerful, this resilient. The head trainer, a grizzled veteran who had been silent for most of the ordeal, finally spoke. We have one last option. The others turned to him, eyes wide. They knew what he meant but hadn't dared consider it. The Black Level simulation, a program never meant to be used. It was designed for war, not training. There were no rules, no safeguards. It was pure survival against overwhelming odds, a battlefield where death was the only certainty. It's not authorized, one of the younger trainers protested weakly. We don't have a choice, the head trainer snapped, his voice harsh. If we don't stop him, we'll be the ones who are finished. Reluctantly, they initiated the Black Level simulation. The human was instantly thrown into a war-torn cityscape. Buildings crumbled, the ground was scorched, and the sky was darkened by the smoke of endless battles. There was no time to adjust. Enemy forces, alien combat units, war drones, and mechanized infantry descended upon him immediately. Their numbers were infinite, their weapons advanced beyond anything used in training. This was no longer a test. It was a kill zone. From the control room, the trainers watched in silence, their hands tense on the controls. They expected the human to falter, to finally meet a challenge too great even for him. But as the simulation unfolded, their hopes evaporated. The human fought like a machine. Every step, every movement was flawless. He didn't just defend himself, he took control of the battlefield. Using guerrilla tactics, he dismantled squads of enemy soldiers, turning their advanced technology against them. When overwhelmed, he didn't retreat, he adapted, finding weak points in their formations, exploiting every vulnerability. The alien trainers were speechless. This wasn't just skill. It was instinct, something far beyond what they had prepared for. They had designed this simulation to break even the strongest warriors, yet the human moved through it with a terrifying efficiency. Shut it down, one trainer whispered, fear creeping into their voice. But no one moved. The battle intensified. The human, undeterred by the endless waves of enemies, continued to dominate. He used every resource available, every scrap of the environment to his advantage. Alien combatants fell by the dozens, and the once mighty machines were reduced to wreckage. The trainers had never seen anything like it. As the final phase of the simulation kicked in, the entire city began to collapse, leaving the human to fight not just against enemies but against the environment itself. Buildings crumbled, fires raged, and explosions tore through the streets. It was chaos on an unimaginable scale. But still, the human pressed forward, navigating the destruction with precision and focus. He moved through the carnage, evading the crumbling infrastructure, avoiding death with split-second decisions. Even as the city fell apart around him, he was unstoppable. The trainers stared at the screen, their faces drained of color. They had nothing left. No more challenges, no more simulations. The human had beaten them all. In the end, the simulation shut itself down, unable to continue. The battlefield disappeared, and the human stood alone in an empty room, breathing steady, his face expressionless. The control room was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. The trainers were paralyzed by the realization of what they had just witnessed. The human looked up at the observation window one last time, his gaze steady, unwavering. Is that the best you've got?